My efforts were not the magical efforts that all of a sudden ended the Cyprus conflict. I wish they were. I'd be written up in all the journals, and I probably would have gotten a Nobel Peace Prize. Because Cyprus is where diplomats and people like me go to die trying to correct these issues and injustices. But we're still trying, and if we don't give up, someday we're actually going to affect that. So that's part of the problem, and I will tell you that there are two scholarly groups, major scholarly groups in the world. One is called the International Association of Genocide Scholars, IAGS. The other is called INOGS, the International Network of Genocide Scholars. The first one believes in scholarship and activism. The second one believes only in scholarship. There are, neither group really likes to release its membership numbers. It's like we're in this secret kind of, I don't know, people get upset and things. But the best I can identify, there are about 40 of us who are in both groups and who really want to say, I really respect INOG's scholarly foundations. I really respect that view, but I can't live without the other component. I can't be somebody who doesn't then take that and put that into action and start doing the activism that's required of this. And so IAGS is a little bigger. It's much older. It was started by many of the founders of the field. But they are the ones that believe in both activism and scholarship. So you'll see them say, hey, from our lessons in history, we know that what's happening in Syria right now is a genocide. We want a resolution before the Congress for us to take action. Right? Or we were the ones pushing behind the scenes to get the Secretary of State, Condoleezza Rice, and to declare Darfur a genocide. As a scholarly body, we were doing those kinds of actions and activities while at the same time sending many of our members into those conflicts, putting us into those areas to try to put pressure on the international community to take larger action. So it's not a hypothetical that there is that duality of the convention. It's a very real thing. So then what are my top 5 issues? Okay, I've kind of hit on them a little bit. I'll try to cover them in fairly quick form here so that we have some time to do some talking. And the first is that problem of never again. And I think that that's a crisis and a problem in the field because it sets us up for failure. Right? You all have been children at some point in your lives. And at some point in your lives, I'm going to guarantee you, your parents had said, don't you ever do that again. Or there will be consequences. I don't know what the consequences are, but I'm sure they were pretty threatening, right? And I'm sure your parents meant it at the time. But did you do it again? And did you get away with it? Chances are, okay, maybe 1 or 2 dads pulled out the belt and that was the end of it. I don't know, but that doesn't happen in the modern day, right? But most of us, we know that those kinds of, absolute statements rarely can hold true. And that's the caveat that we put out in genocide studies, that we study this so it never happens again, but we're unable to affect that. And I think that honestly, I think that that's partly demoralizing for me sometimes. I mean, I wonder, it's great for job security, right? Okay, there'll always be a genocide that I can study. There'll always be students I can reach out to and maybe hook you into this. But on the other hand, how much longer do I want to try to do this work and not have the results that I really truly want? And so you go through these bouts of battling with yourself when you do this over how do I do that? Am I naive? Am I holding on to the visions of my 22-year-old self and thinking I can save the world? Or do I have more realistic visions as to what effects I might have that are small and singular? I still believe that one of the Cypriot kids that I worked with in all those years is going to become the president of Cyprus in either community and solve the problem. But in 20 years, they're going to put that theory to the test. But I've got 20 years of delusion left, and I'm going to hang on to it. I don't think, also because of never again, I don't think we're political enough, frankly. I'll tell you why genocide happens and why it doesn't get stopped and why we aren't contributing to that, because we lack the political will. You lack it, I lack it. We are not able to convince our government to go out there and actually do what it takes to stop a genocide. We're quick to go to war, but we're not quick to jump into somebody else's war, if we define it that way, or conflict, because a bunch of scholars come and say, well, but it's really not a civil war, it's a genocide. Go back and look at the television coverage of Rwanda in 1994, and I will tell you the most important coverage it got in the United States for the first few weeks wasn't about the death of the people, it was about the death of the guerrillas. And I think that that's a tragedy, I really do. I am not belittling that at all. The death of the mountain gorillas is an ecological disaster as part of a genocide, and that's one of the pathologies we can study. But when Americans cared more about guerrillas than the people, what are we doing? What political will do we really have at that point? Neither one convinced us to go in. So it's not like, all of a sudden, if we just convince ourselves that it's about the environment, that somehow that's magic. So I think that remains a bit of a problem for us today. I think that there is a problem of denial in genocide, and there's a problem of denial that actually impacts us negatively as we go on this very day. Denial is, for those of you who don't know, there's Greg Stanton, who worked for the State Department, came out with a ordering called the 8 stages of genocide, and denial is the 8th and final stage. And it's interesting, he said, because denial means we actually go back up to stage 1. Because for you to say that my people or any people didn't really suffer this, that this event was made up or manufactured or just contrived, means that you're actually perpetrating the things that led to it in the first place again. So it kind of creates a circular motion, cyclical or circular, that keeps perpetrating that issue. Denial has potential problems for scholars. What if 90% of us agree that Darfur is a genocide, but 10% of us don't? Well, what do I start to say about that 10%? Have they reached that conclusion in error? The United States said Darfur is a genocide, but we were among a very select crowd when it came to that internationally. The UN said, no, not yet. Wait, we don't think so. We're not willing to go out there on that limb with you. But that leads us to this issue of, do we all have to agree that something is a genocide for it to be a genocide? And I'll tell you, Cyprus is a really controversial case. I am not well loved by a lot of people when I say that part of what happened in Cyprus between 1963 and 1974 constitutes genocide. Cypriots don't want to look at themselves that way. And many of them deny the activities, blanket, carte blanche, deny the activities that led to those conflicts, that led to all those deaths. And other people say, I'm making it up, right? So, and I contend that they're denying it. So it leads to scholarly fighting, it leads to fighting among groups and nations and people. Turkey continues to deny that there was ever an Armenian genocide. To this day, you watch, April 24th, write it on your calendar, mark it down. April 24th is known as Martyrs' Day in the Armenian genocide. It was the day that it started. It was the day in which Turkey rounded up all the Armenian leadership and executed them. And President Obama will be faced and confronted with a challenge, again, for what, the 6th time in his presidency, I think. Will he say that this was a genocide? The Armenians want him to. As a senator, he said it was. He said he would make sure he said it as president. He has not said it as president. He has backed away. People will say, you're denying it. Turkey continues to deny. Says it was not genocide. It was war. It was World War I. A lot of people died in World War I. The Armenians brought it on themselves. They were siding with the Russians. We had to control the frontier and the borders. We didn't want to have this group be the soft underbelly of the Ottoman Empire and allow the Russians to just come in and collapse the Ottoman Empire. Right? It was not a genocide. Those issues play down to this very day. Why isn't Turkey in the EU? Now, economically today they don't want to be, right? We understand that. But they regret it in many other ways, and they're not in it primarily because they're a Muslim nation, which is one issue, and they deny the Armenian genocide. It's a pressing issue for keeping them out of the European Union and for the role they've played in Cyprus. Okay? So in 3 quick sentences, I've given you the very reason why Turkey is not in the EU and is not going to go into the EU unless she's willing to come around and solve and admit to some of those atrocities and those problems. Okay. Just last Sunday, in the major newspaper, in the major daily in Guatemala City in Guatemala, where the trial of Efrain Rios Montt is going on right now for genocide. He was president in 82 and 83, ordered the genocide of some 86,000 people. They're finally putting him on trial. In the Sunday paper, in an insert that looks much like the Tribune magazine, right, the high glossy thing, I have it in PDF. There was a 20-page insert denying that it was a genocide. Oh, no, it wasn't genocide, it was war. And those people just got caught up in it, and they, innocents die in war, and it was a fabrication of the CIA. Of course, America's responsible. They were communists. They had it coming. I mean, 6 or 7 different reasons as to why these people, 86,000 people, died in just 18 months of Rios Montt's presidency. Somebody paid for that. That's a lot of money to pay for that high glossy thing, to get it inserted into the Sunday paper, and it's not a coincidence that it's happening while he's on trial. It's clear that he's got some supporters behind him, and that they want to manipulate the outcome of his court. That's denial, absolute denial. And it leads to some problems and conflicts, and people in Guatemala are enduring death threats all the time because of their stance on the genocide. Leads us to then this notion of the problem of proliferation, and I hope that we can talk about it as a group at the end. If more and more and more things are genocide, does that take away from the power of the word? Right? Think about this. I mean, mathematically, if I can liberally use that term among historians, because we know how we work about math, right? But if I once had one genocide, and that was the Holocaust, it was a very, very powerful thing. Right? We all knew the horrors, and we all knew the dimensions of it, and we all understood, God, that's really horrific. But let's add up let's go to Stalin's math for a minute. One death is what? Get a little interaction here so far. Stalin said one death is a tragedy. 1 million deaths, a statistic, right? And you and I can sympathize with that. If we know somebody who is in a situation, or we are intimately involved with an individual and something happens, that is a tragedy to us. But can we really comprehend 22 million people in the Holodomor? Not really. Even in the Holocaust, 11 million. So let's take that problem there and catapult it into, if we had 1 or 2 or maybe even 3 genocides, real pure, true genocides, very powerful stuff. We know that is the crime of crimes, right? We go up the scale. You've got murder, mass murder, crimes against humanity, and genocide. And there's not supposed to be anything higher than that. But now if I have 183 genocides, where does it end? Who's right? Is what is happening in Israel-Palestine a genocide? In the Nuba Mountains, which is now South Sudan, is that a genocide? Was Cyprus legitimately a genocide? Turkey, Armenia, Syria, Egypt? Right? On and on and on, and all these questions start getting asked, and we have to consider this proliferation as a problem that we have to solve. Some people say it still is powerful because these groups still don't want it to be labeled as a genocide. They will fight against it. Well, then we get back into our problem of denial, right? Because does any nation really want to stand up and say, yes, guess what? We acknowledge it. Truth be told, a couple have, right? Germany is full on in acknowledgement of everything that happened in the Holocaust. They've done everything they possibly can to make reparations. Right? Australia, a few years ago, finally said, you know what? Everything we've done to the Aboriginals constitutes genocide. We apologize. We will end it now. This was only about 6 years ago. Believe it or not, they said, we'll end it now. They were still taking children and putting them into white families and taking them out of their culture in the Aboriginal regions. Okay? So we go back and forth between proliferation, denial, denial, proliferation, and it takes a very kind of advanced progressive mind to get us out of those situations and those issues. So yeah, I wrestle with that. I'm not sure that I have answers as much as I have more questions. I'm writing a chapter right now for a book that's going to come out probably in about a year called, the title of the book is Ambiguous Genocides. And we're supposed to wrestle with that problem in our chapters about whether or not, what makes this an ambiguous genocide? Does it fit the legal definition or doesn't it? And some people would say if it does, it is. If it doesn't, it's not. But we all know that there's social perceptions of genocide, and the legal definition includes nothing about political groups, which is how